Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the reading of the fic entitled Snare. Here's the summary. A recent uptake of Abyss Order activity has Kaia concerned. They are planning to take out the Darknight Hero. While attempting to help his brother, Kaia inadvertently makes himself their target. As the Abyss Order uses Kaia to lure out the Darknight Hero, Diluc and the Knights have to fight against the clock to save him. All the while, Diluc is forced to face his misconceptions about Kaia and take an honest look at his relationship with his brother. This fic is just over 80,000 words with 37 chapters. Here's Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Slamming Door. Kaia groaned as he woke up. His back and neck were sore from his sleeping position. He sat up straight on his chair and stretched, yawning loudly as his muscles protested. A quick look at the timepiece on his desk told him it was nearing 1 in the morning. He looked down tiredly at the paperwork and informant reports covering his whole desk and sighed. He'd fallen asleep at work again. He berated himself as he set out to clean up his workspace before calling it a night. A lot of his work was highly sensitive and classified. Leaving it exposed like this while he napped was unacceptable. He was getting sloppy. He was just too tired. Varka had taken too many nights, too many officers. Their greatly reduced number greatly affected their ability to keep order, while also severely overworking the few remaining officers tasked with keeping the knights in order. Jean was very much running the entire city on her own these days, with so many key personnel missing, including the Grand Master and the Archbishop. Almost everything had to be run by her as the only person left with enough authority to make any important decision. The other captains weren't faring much better. They rarely even got to see one another much these days. Albedo was splitting his time between preventing Klee from blowing up the city, his research, his duty as a captain, and being the only nightly presence in the whole Dragonspine area, making him responsible for keeping an eye on both the Fatui and Abyss Order activity in the area, as well as constantly help rescuing adventurers who kept treading the mountain. Kaia knew the only reason the alchemist managed was because he could keep working through most of the night without sleeping. Sometimes he was very jealous. Eula and her team were spread thin across the land, constantly scouting and exterminating threats on their own. But they were first and foremost scouts. They didn't have the numbers to cover the whole of Mondstadt and defend it properly, meaning some of the farther regions couldn't be properly defended anymore. Normally, it would have been his duty to ride out with his men and take out any threat Eula reported and keep the land safe. But he didn't have a cavalry anymore. Varka took all of it, along with virtually all their horses, and so they had no choice but to abandon part of the territory and move their activity closer to the city to keep the population safe. His duties had been moved inside the city where he was expected to take over for the missing captains. After all, he was a cavalry captain without a cavalry, and a quartermaster with 1/10 of an army to manage, which Kaia couldn't deny was a fair expectation for anyone who didn't know better. It's just that aside from Jean, there wasn't anyone who knew any better. It was the whole point, after all. And so while everyone thought he had nothing but time on his hands, he was actually swamped up to his neck with very few people he could actually rely on to help. The absence of so many nights has caused a noticeable increase in his workload, and it was quickly catching up to him. Once he finished safely putting away the more sensitive documents, he left his office. As he passed in front of the Grand Master's office, he noticed the light flittering under the door. Frowning, he knocked softly. "Come in." Kaia opened the door and walked in. He found Jean still sitting at her desk, reading through reports. "I thought we both agreed not to stay past midnight," he said as he closed the door behind him and sat on the chair in front of her desk. Jean sighed and tiredly smiled at him. "And yet, here we both are." Kaia chuckled. "To be fair, I'm only still here because I fell asleep at my desk." He defended himself with a grin, as if that made it better. Jean shook her head disapprovingly. You've been working way too hard lately. Kaia couldn't help but laugh out loud at the irony of Jean's comment. Jean chuckled a little herself at the situation. I know. But I worry about you. I'm stuck in an office all day and surrounded by knights. It's not like I'm facing any real danger. But you're always going out on your own, often without any backup. I can't help but worry. Kaia smiled reassuringly at her. You know, despite appearances, I'm always careful. Jean sighed. I know. After a few moments of silence, the acting Grandmaster waved at the pile of documents on her desk. I'm getting more reports of Abyss Order sightings inside the city. Have you found out what they're planning? Kaia frowned. Although the Abyss had gone quiet in the few months following the Storm Terror incident, there had been quite an uptake in activity in recent weeks, which was in part responsible for Kaia's current workload. Not much. It is as the official reports say. Sightings have been increasing almost exclusively inside the city walls. Although there have been no attacks, nor any new hideouts discovered. Weirdly enough, they flee whenever they are spotted. They obviously don't want to bring attention to themselves. Jean frowned as she considered her right-hand man carefully before pushing further. And unofficially? Kaia raised a questioning eyebrow at her. Jean usually never directly asked about his unofficial activities. They had a tacit understanding that if she needed to know something, she would know one way or another. But in general, the least she knew of his activities or how he came upon information, the better. For plausible deniability, should something go wrong, no need for her to take the fall with him. For her to ask meant she was worried, which he could understand. The effects of the Storm Terror incident were still being felt to this day, and while they were all grateful to the Traveler for their help in solving the issue, the fact that the Knights hadn't been able to manage it on their own had damaged their reputation and the trust of the population. And the Fatui never missed an opportunity to step in and strengthen their political power whenever the Knights faltered. They could hardly take another such blow right now. Unfortunately, it's more of the same. He crossed his arms and frowned. The ones I've managed to catch were not particularly talkative, which I admit, in a way, is concerning on its own. They are following orders from something, and either it's keeping them in the dark about its plan, or they fear it more than they fear me. And you have no idea what it is? Jean asked. Kaia sighed as he looked up at the ceiling. Too many, actually. Abyss creatures do not refer to themselves in the same manner we do. They've been referring to it in a manner that could be roughly equivalent to our Lord or Master, which makes me believe we are likely not simply dealing with a particularly intelligent Abyss mage. But as to exactly what it is, your guess is as good as mine. Jean frowned as she considered Kaia's words. The Abyss was home to many creatures and various horrors, but information about them was scarce and often unreliable. They rarely showed themselves, and when they did, few of those who faced them lived to tell the tale. And you have no idea what they're planning? Kaia hesitated. I haven't been able to find out any detail about what their plan is, but I have a good enough guess at who's their intended target. I was considering seeking them out to see if they know anything. Jean frowned. She didn't really need to have this part spelled out for her. Outside of the Knights, there were few other individuals in the city who were worth the Abyss's attention, and only one actively antagonizing them. What do you think we should do? Jean asked. Kaia sighed. For now, nothing. We stand back and we observe. Jean frowned disapprovingly. We can't just stand idle and give them free rein. Kaia smiled softly, apologetic. He absolutely adored Jean. In his opinion, she was doing an exceptional job as the acting Grand Master, especially considering what Varka had left her to work with. He had no doubt she'd be one of the greatest Grand Masters in the history of Mondstadt one day, and he would follow her into the Abyss if she asked. But there was a reason he usually didn't tell her these kind of things, until he needed to. Jean was always eager to charge in, ready to do anything to protect anyone and everyone, unwilling to let evil take even one baby step in her city. Truthfully, he wished she'd never change, hoped she'd never have to, and he was ready to do everything it took to keep her untainted by the world's darkness. That's not what I'm saying, but we can't act rashly. If we do, we risk provoking them to act faster before we're ready, with potentially devastating results. Jean stared at him. He could see the flickering hesitation in her eyes as she internally debated with herself over the best course of action. Eventually, she sighed. "Please keep me updated, and promise me you'll be careful." Kaia smiled with a smile he hoped looked reassuring. He had a feeling she wasn't only warning him about the abyss. Hidden behind his mask and cloak, Diluc expertly navigated the roofs of Mondstadt as he silently stalked his prey. Nothing to really brag about, just 3 petty thieves who may or may not be affiliated with the treasure hoarders, judging from the bandanas masking their faces, not so subtly trying to sneak away with loot they had taken from a nearby house. Not really a threat by any means, certainly not for the Darknight Hero, but things had been slow these past few weeks. The Fatui kept getting themselves in diplomatic trouble in nation after nation these days, so they were keeping a low profile. Abyss activity had been on the rise recently, which may or may not indicate they were up to something. But so far nothing worth mentioning had happened, and he hadn't spotted them so far tonight. Crimes around Mondstadt had also been going down in the year since his return, in no small part due to him putting away quite a number of criminals. Those he didn't catch were also less likely to act due to their fear of being caught. Funny how crime goes down when people are actually scared of being caught. And so there he was, running after run-of-the-mill petty thieves. He might as well take care of them, not like the Knights were going to do anything about it. Eventually, his targets stopped running around and hid in a dark, deserted alley to split their meager earnings. Diluc perched himself on a roof right above them. He didn't even bother to summon his claymore. A few well-placed punches would be all he'd need. As he was about to jump down, he felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He turned around sharply, scanning the surrounding rooftops. There was nothing to be seen. Still, he glared back at his empty surroundings. He had a pretty good enough idea of what, or rather who, was watching him. Diluc opted to just ignore them and turned his attention back to the thieves below him. Seeing them properly distracted, he jumped down from the roof. A face half peeked out from behind a nearby chimney, thick fur around its neck slightly rustling in the wind. A single blue eye watched silently as the Darknight Hero jumped down. Once the hooded figure was out of view, it straightened up, ready to follow and keep watch. "Well, hello there." The Abyss Mage squeaked and turned around in a panic at the voice, but it was already too late. Ice shot up from the ground and trapped it up to its neck. The mage found itself staring at a single starry light blue eye only a few inches away from its face. "How about a little chat?" Kaia asked, smirking almost pleasantly down at his helpless victim. Diluc frowned down at the pathetic display in front of him. As he expected, the thieves were nothing more than a bunch of cowards. They'd fallen to their knees and begged for their lives the moment he dropped on them. As if the Darknight Hero had a habit of killing criminals. He sighed, annoyed. Knocking criminals out usually made the whole thing a lot easier for him, but he could hardly physically harm people unwilling to fight back and begging for mercy. He'd have to physically restrain them and take them out to a patrol route for a knight to find. He was seriously wondering if they were even worth the trouble. Maybe he could just scare them up a bit and send them on their way. Before he could make up his mind, he was startled as a large object fell on the ground only a couple of feet to his side. Shards of ice flew off everywhere as it broke up on impact. Diluc stared, bewildered, as a Hydro Abyss Mage grunted in pain on the ground. Another cloaked figure jumped down from the roof, landing on the other side of the mage. Unimpressed, Diluc glared at the cavalry captain, annoyed by the man's interruption. He couldn't see Kaia's face under his hood, but he had no problem imagining the smug smirk he likely had on his face as he stared right back. Their staring contest was cut short by the sound of something falling on the ground and a curse. Diluc whirled around. just in time to see the last of the thieves scatter out of view in another alley. Angry, he turned back to Kaia, almost snarling. "Look what you've done. They ran away," he accused. Kaia chuckled lightly. "Not my fault you're so easily distracted." Diluc narrowed his eyes at the captain. "Did you do it on purpose?" Kaia waved dismissively. "It's just a couple of petty thieves. I'm sure they got their lesson." Diluc scoffed. "Typical Knights of Favonius. Can't even be bothered to do their own damn job." Diluc could see Kaia roll his eyes under his cloak. "Look, we have more important things to worry about." "We," Diluc interrupted. Kaia sighed impatiently. "Yes, we," he continued. "That mage was trailing you. He's not the first one I've caught. They've been at it for a few weeks now. They're planning something, and we have to figure—" "I don't need your help," Diluc cut back. "How many times do I have to tell you to stay out of my business?" Kaia took a deep breath, clenching his fists as he tried to calm himself and not rise up to Diluc's bait. He needed to work this out. "I haven't been able to get much info out of the other ones. I was hoping—" "No." Kaia frowned. "Stop being—" "I'm not working with you," Diluc glared back, crossing his arms. "The last time I made that mistake, you backstabbed me and handed me over to the Fatui." Kaia sighed. "You're still hung up about that. I told you. It wouldn't have been convincing otherwise, and I was totally planning on breaking you out. You just got impatient." Diluc snarled at him. "I know how much your words are truly worth. You're nothing but a liar and a manipulator. I don't trust you to give me the time of day, and we both know you'd benefit from getting rid of me." Kaia flinched, visibly hurt by Diluc's comment. "You don't really—" "Forget it." He shook his head, turning his attention back to the mage. "Let's just—" "Shit, it's gone." The space between them was empty, the mage apparently taking a page from the thieves' book and taking off while they were arguing. Diluc turned around. "Not my fault you're so easily distracted," he mocked back as he walked away. "I'm serious. They're planning something," Kaia argued as he followed him deeper into the alley. "It's what they do. Whatever they have planned, I'll deal with it on my own. I don't need you." "Wait!" Kaia reached out, grabbing Diluc's upper arm. "I said, get lost!" Diluc lashed out, turning around and roughly pulled his arm out of Kaia's grasp as pyro flared to life in his hand. Kaia recoiled, the flames narrowly missing his face as he stumbled back and fell on the ground. Both brothers stared at one another in shock, their minds both in the present and in the shared memory of the worst day of their lives. It was Kaia who broke out of their trance first. "Fine." His voice was a slightly higher pitch than usual. "Have it your way." The cavalry captain got up, quickly fixing his clothes, purposefully avoiding looking at Diluc. "I'm done." Diluc snapped out of his daze, taking a step forward and reaching out. The moment he moved, the temperature around them dropped as Kaia took a step back, and a dozen cryo spikes rose up from the ground and surrounding walls, all pointing menacingly at him. For a fleeting second, Diluc saw it, the flash of fear in Kaia's eye, before the knight could fully regain his composure. The starry eye narrowed as Kaia glared at him. "Go ahead and get yourself killed. See if I care." "Kaia, wait." Kaia snapped his finger. A wall of ice quickly rose up between the two of them, filling the entire width of the alley and raising up a good 12 feet. Diluc sighed in frustration as he looked down at his hand. It had been a while since he'd lost control like that. Pyro was notorious for being the easiest element to lose control of and the most dangerous. He'd always worked hard at it and prided himself in his mastery of the volatile element. But Kaia had such a way of riling him up. He looked back at the icy wall in contemplation. It wasn't truly a real obstacle to him. It was more Kaia metaphorically slamming the door in his face than anything else. He could easily melt it down and go after the knight. The question was, should he? Kaia and he had had a lot of petty arguments since he came back. They couldn't be in the same room without arguing. But this was different. Kaia was obviously very upset this time. He'd been afraid of him. Damn it. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 1 of the fic Snare. Chapter 2 will be up next. I would love to hear what you all are thinking of this one. This is the first time I'm venturing into doing podfics for Genshin Impact. It is a favored game of mine, so I'd love to hear your reactions if you're a fan, if this is something new to you. There's a lot of amazing relationship dynamics that are done throughout the game series, and this fic is just one example of how it was played into and how these are fleshed out and developed. So I would love to hear what you all are thinking. I've had this one on my list to podfic for a while and just really wanted to finally get into it. So drop your comments below. Just a reminder, of course, too, that you can always slide over to AO3, leaving comments, kudos, and support to the original author as well. I'm sure it's much appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.